So you're saying admitting the truth about ourselves, even when it's a negative thing, can actually be socially advantageous, even if it's going against the belief that most of us have that we're decent, honest, good people. You know, people tend to like themselves and think they're maybe even much better than they actually are.
Yes, you probably know that study too, that 80% of people think that they're better than average. We're all from Lake Wobegon, we're all better than average. People put an enormous amount of psychological energy into trying to protect themselves from feeling that they did something wrong, or that they were mistaken, or that they harmed another person. And the irony is that very often when people stop fighting that realization, when they're able to say, wait a minute, I've thought all along that I was right about this belief. It could be something like hormone replacement therapy. It could be a medical problem or a psychological issue or a scientific one or a personal one. And when people finally say, boy, I was wrong, it's often a tremendous relief both to themselves and to people around them. I want to draw a distinction here between cognitive dissonance, which really is hardwired. The brain really is designed to distort the way we perceive information, to keep our views consonant and to keep us working for the things we believe. But how we think about our mistakes is not hardwired. I think our culture is particularly mistake-phobic, if you will. We've somehow learned that to admit a mistake is to admit that we're stupid, and that is strictly a learned cultural notion. Many people learn as individuals, and in plenty of communities or in organizations that don't think this way, where people learn that they can admit a mistake and it doesn't mean they're stupid, then you can create a world in which it makes it more possible for people to say, boy, I really got off on the wrong track here. I finally have to face the evidence that I was wrong, and now what can we learn from this and how can we improve things? Certainly in medicine, in psychotherapy, in our companies, in the law, we really hope that our leaders and that our professionals will be able to face the evidence when a new and better method comes along.
I'd like to let our listeners know that you can get a copy of Mistakes Were Made through our website, pointofinquiry.org. If you listen to the show regularly, you know that I'm always raving about various books, but this is one of the half dozen or so since we've started Point of Inquiry that I've given to all my friends and family. So if you're at all interested in what makes people tick and how to avoid some very human pitfalls, you need this book. Professor Tavris, to get back to our discussion, I found it very interesting that you talk about how many people in prison are proven by DNA science that they're innocent, yet despite that, many prosecuting attorneys refuse to admit that they're innocent. You say that one reason there are so many wrongful convictions is it's not only the arresting officers, but the attorneys, even the judges themselves experiencing cognitive dissonance, and they just can't admit that they were wrong.
Yes, that's exactly right. We all tend to divide the world into, good people and bad people. And what we try to show here in this book is that some of our greatest problems don't come from bad people, but from good people who do bad things in order to preserve their opinion of themselves as being good people. And you can see this very clearly in the legal system. Once the cops get a suspect and think that they've got the guilty person, they blind themselves to disconfirming evidence, to dissonant information.
Right. You say that investigators are actually trained to believe that anyone they interrogate is guilty, hence it justifies the amount of lying or manipulation that they might use to obtain a confession.
Exactly right. And we see this, of course, with the present administration's justification of interrogation techniques, torture, because, after all, if we have detained these people, they must be guilty. Of what? We don't know, but if you're here in prison, you must be guilty, and that alone justifies what we do to you to get you to admit that you did something wrong. Now, of course, many times you do have guilty people that you've arrested. Most of the time, when people are arrested, most of the time, statistically, they might be guilty, but that's not how our system is based. You are supposed to prove that this person is guilty beyond reasonable doubt. And the danger of the confirmation bias is that once the system starts rolling along information suggesting that the person might be innocent is systematically excluded. And it's because the cops think they're doing a terrific job. They pride themselves on their ability to know if somebody's guilty by how they sit and how they squirm in the chair. They pride themselves on how their experience has, enabled them to really know who's guilty. Same with prosecutors. Once we go forward to prosecute this case, we'll do everything in our power to get this person put away. So now you've put this person in prison for 10 years. DNA exonerates the guy. What do we do? How do we say, my God, I was wrong. I was incompetent in this case. Well, we say, okay, he might have been innocent of this, but he surely is guilty of many other terrible things. So I was justified in putting him in prison. They have all kinds of justifications. Okay, so he didn't rape this woman, but he was there with another guy who raped her, and he probably did so too, only he didn't ejaculate. So they allow themselves in this way, they protect themselves from the awareness that these good, competent prosecutors, put an innocent person in prison because the justice system doesn't make mistakes. It's interesting that in Canada and in Britain, both judicial systems are now becoming more and more aware of the prevalence of wrongful convictions and have taken steps to reduce the likelihood of those convictions and of overturning them later if new evidence comes along. Our system seems still terrified of realizing how many wrongful convictions there are.
And you think maybe it's part of the culture, that our culture just doesn't reward admitting mistakes?
That's right. That's our culture in general, and the criminal justice system in particular. As we say in our book, as one prosecutor points out, it's as if our criminal justice system doesn't realize that any system run by human beings is going to make mistakes. And so if we really care about justice, we must have as many procedures in place to free the innocent as we do to convict the guilty. And we don't.
Let's switch gears a bit and talk about science and politics, kind of in the context of the self-deception you're talking about. You don't really touch about it in the book, but I'm interested in your take on the following. The politics surrounding climate science that says global warming's real. Well, there are a lot of people who challenged it, maybe for their own political or financial reasons. Yet I don't imagine that there are a bunch of people in some smoky back room saying, okay, now we're planning to forever doom the world, the future of our planet, but at least we're going to make a buck. So how do we spread this misinformation? My point is that they actually seemed to start believing their anti-global warming propaganda. So here's the question, Professor Tavris. How do you break through your own self-deceptions and rationalizations when you have so many other people agreeing with you that you're right, people justifying your position? The same might apply to a question about the president and the Iraq war, for instance.
Exactly right. The most crucial antidote to the confirmation bias, to our habit of surrounding ourselves with like-minded people, is to make sure that we don't, to make sure that we are surrounded by enough good friends and colleagues and coworkers who will disagree with us. The prototype for this in Doris Kearns Goodwin's brilliant book about Abraham Lincoln, Team of Rivals, is exactly the title of her book. Lincoln appointed to his cabinet men who disagreed with him about how best to pursue the question of ending slavery in America. People who disagreed with him, people who had called him all kinds of names before the election. He wanted to expose himself to other ideas about how to proceed. And, in fact, John Kennedy, after the disastrous Bay of Pigs, the fiasco, as it's always called, learned from that he had created a situation of groupthink in which dissenters felt stifled and did not feel free to say their actual opinion.